Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Hi, welcome to the Impact Effect Network, a place where we discuss making business matter through conscious leadership. I'm Tom Eddington. My guest today is Jim Dethmer, co-founder of the Conscious Leadership Group. Welcome, Jim. Many conversations with you and your co-founder, Diana Chapman, and love the work that you guys are doing and the impact that your book has had in the conscious leadership space, and leadership in general has been terrific. It's nice to see you guys making such a huge contribution to the conscious leadership movement.
Yeah, it's been great fun.
I'd love to just have you share a little bit with our audience about your background and how you came to this place called Conscious Leadership.
Well, the way I describe it is that since I was a little kid, I've been a seeker. And probably what's true is that there was like an ache in the center of my chest, literally a physical ache from the time I was a little boy. And I was looking to get that resolved. So I've been a seeker looking for peace, equanimity, imperturbability, whatever you want to call it, all of my life. And that journey took me first into religious space. So my advanced degrees in theology, I was a minister for a number of years. And then that wasn't filling the ache in the center of my chest. So I left that and started to travel into the world of more what I would call consciousness. Started to sit under the tutelage of some fantastic teachers, and in the process started coaching leaders and transforming organizations, basically bringing to them everything that I was finding. So all of my life, I've been interested in personal development, especially in the realm of consciousness. We'll talk about what that means. I've been interested in relationships, and I've been interested in leadership. So our work at the Conscious Leadership Group is all about helping individuals, teams, and organizations practice conscious leadership, especially in relationship to each other. Because as you know, Tom, you can do whatever you do, meditate, do presencing practices on your own. But as soon as you get in relationship with other human beings, the real test occurs. So those three things, seeking, relationships, and leadership, have interested me all of my life.
And when you talk about some of the teachers, I've had conversations with Diana about Michael Beckwith and his model for the 4 states of consciousness, or what I call the 4 states of consciousness. Who are some of the other teachers that helped shape and influence your thinking?
Yeah, great. In addition to Beckwith and his model, which we love, Gay and Katie Hendricks, Doctors Gay and Katie Hendricks, had a profound impact on my life. I think Gay and Katie understand relationships as well as anybody in the world. And a number of the models throughout our book came from them. And then we're also deeply indebted to Byron Katie, and we're deeply indebted to Hale Dwoskin and the Sedona method, because we believe that those 2 modalities actually deal with what we call the taproot that keeps us from living and leading in full consciousness. And then we also tip our hat to Getting Things Done and David Allen, especially around the notion of being impeccable around agreements and integrity. So those have been the primary people who contributed to the work that we're bringing into the world. And then just in my personal development in terms of consciousness, there have been some other great teachers of meditation and things like that I've sat under. But the Hendricks and Byron Katie and Hale Dwoskin have largely shaped the work that we've brought into the world.
And how did you have to relanguage or repurpose or bridge that work into the corporate environment?
I think one of the gifts that we bring to the world is we're translators. So we can go out and sit at the feet of, I think, people who really understand reality and bring their message back to hard-edged business people with language that works. So I think it's kind of a natural orientation that we have. I think many of the leaders that we work with wouldn't have much time for Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle or fill in the blank. So we have to relanguage. So the simple model that we use, again, that we originally got from Gay and Katie, above and below the line. You're either leading from above the line or below the line. We wanted an incredibly simple model. And we say, when you're above the line, you're in a state of trust. And when you're below the line, you're in a state of reactivity or fear. Again, those are fourth grade words, and there's nothing touchy-feely, airy-fairy about them. They're just practical. Same thing with candor, and what does it look like to really tell the truth to each other in hard-edge business settings. So what we do, and this is kind of how our brand has been created, is going out to all these great teachers. And then we used to say we smuggle transformational concepts back into individuals, teams, and organizations who wouldn't naturally go out and find those things.
I've heard you quote Jack Welch talking about leaders who have grounded in reality are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah, it's great. One of my favorite quotes by Welch is, "The team that sees reality the best wins." The truth of the matter is none of us sees reality very clearly, both individually and together. So our work is all built around growing in self-awareness. Can I see myself more accurately? And so our work is all built around creating feedback-rich environments where I can see myself more accurately. And then we believe that teams have a greater chance of seeing reality. It could be market realities, competitive realities, innovation realities. They can see those better if they create certain kinds of conversations amongst themselves. And quite frankly, with customers, with competitors, with innovators. So we want people to grow in seeing themselves more accurately through feedback-rich environments. And we want teams to learn how to have conversations, which are basically conversations that are not heavily rooted in everybody trying to prove they're right. So if you look at people who are living from large ego fixation, who are really trapped in their ego or their identity, most of the conversations are built around proving that I'm right, because the ego believes that in order to survive, it has to be right. So when teams have those kinds of conversations, their ability to see reality diminishes because they're more interested in proving their point. So we want to support teams to lessen their desire to prove they're right and increase their desire to learn and be curious. We think when I grow in self-awareness and teams learn how to have fabulous conversations, then the possibility of seeing reality goes up significantly.
From my experience, to be able to get teams to that place, it requires a high level of trust. How is that your experience, and how do you get teams there?
So one of the questions we have all the time is, it's a chicken and egg question. For example, which comes first, trust or candor? Being authentic or trusting? And most people think in the workplace, think that trust comes first. In other words, if I trust you, then I'm willing to be candid. But in our experience, they actually flow powerfully together. If I reveal risk, take a little risk of vulnerability, that actually increases trust in the team. So for example, when we go into a team, we measure trust, we do some surveys to just get a kind of a benchmark of what's the level of trust in here. And then we reveal that back to the team. We say, here's your current level of trust. We describe it to them. And then we ask them, would they be willing to deepen trust? Now, the other thing we do, is we kind of take trust and turn it on its head. Most people think that trust is dependent upon you being trustworthy. Like you and I have a relationship.
Right.
So I could go, well, I'll trust you, Tom, if I think you're trustworthy. That's the natural way that people approach trust. And there's a legitimate piece of that. But we've actually found that trust, for it to be lasting and more stable, I have to trust myself to be okay, regardless of how you show up. So, you know, Tom, that a big part of all of our work, yours and mine and everybody's around consciousness, is moving the locus of control from out there, whether you're trustworthy, to in here, whether I'm trustworthy, whether I can trust myself to be okay with you showing up how you show up. So we want to change the way the conversation around trust is occurring amongst a team. Now, that's a gentle transformation over time because it's a radical idea that we're talking about.
It's fun taking individuals, leaders, leadership teams on that journey. And it's always filled with unexpected outcomes and surprises, but it's quite transformational when folks are willing to make the commitment on that journey.
Yeah, it is. It's once they start to practice just a little bit. We start out very simply. We just ask people to start to locate themselves. So, are you above the line or are you below the line? Are you speaking from trust and presence, or are you speaking from fear and reactivity? Just pause and check. And you're early on with clients, we start to teach them that little process. And just the effect of people interrupting the normal kind of trance of their personality and checking, where am I, starts to change organizations and leadership relationships, because people are interrupting their natural pattern and bringing some awareness to it. So just a little bit of awareness and insight by a simple question of where am I starts to make a meaningful difference rather quickly in how people lead and relate to one another.
This conversation is interesting because it's, it falls into the category of what I call the soft stuff. And I've been telling my clients for years that the soft stuff is actually the hard stuff, and the hard stuff is the easy thing to do. And yet the soft stuff, so to speak, is what really impacts the organization's success and bottom line, the culture, the level of employee engagement, and the financial results. Has that been your experience?
I think you go back to Dan Goldman's work on initial EQ work now, which is 25, 30 years old, his initial work.
Yep.
And Dan and all the follow-ons, including people like you, have pretty much proven that long-term, over the course of one's career, EQ trumps IQ. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need meaningful IQ. You got to be able to get a seat at the table. You got to be able to do analytical capabilities. You've got to have some hard skills, like you said. But once those are basically established, then long-term, that EQ really kicks in. And that's really true with teams. The ability to come up with great data analytics and the ability to do all that hard stuff empowers us to do is essential, but it's not sufficient. The soft stuff, and I love your idea that the soft stuff is hard and the hard stuff is easy. That's been our experience. But that soft stuff really makes a difference in terms of what you're pointing at: trust, collaboration, innovation, those kinds of things that are so incredibly important, let alone just sustainability, especially in this current economy where the unemployment rate is so low. We're in a constant battle for the best talent. And what we're seeing over and over again is individuals, teams, and organizations that start to practice the kind of stuff you're talking about here and you're doing in your life. When they start to practice that in organizations, that workplace becomes a place that people want to go to work. And that becomes a hard reality when you start to win the talent war, for lack of a better term, because you're creating environments that are conducive to people showing up with their whole self, and where they're being empowered to bring their best self to work and to be sharpened daily by world-class relationships. That becomes an incredible competitive advantage versus a dog-eat-dog environment where there's low trust and, where I'm afraid I'm going to get stabbed in the back, and some places even stabbed in the front. You're going to lose the talent war in this day and age if you're creating cultures like that.
I see it quite often when I start working with them that folks wake up in the morning and they leave consciously or unconsciously as they're getting ready for going to work, whether they're working from home or virtually or in a physical space. they start unpacking parts of themselves. And by the time they actually show up for work, they're 40, 50, 60% of their whole self.
What a great point. That's interesting because just off the top of my head, that correlates, to the studies that have been done around people's level of engagement and how much people are really sleepwalking through their professional lives. And I think significantly so because, like you said, they're bringing a small percentage of themselves to that incredibly critical environment where they work.
So you mentioned Daniel Goleman's work, which was incredibly seminal at the time and still is shaping and influencing the workplace. So we're talking about the Qs, the IQ and the emotional intelligence, the EQ. You and I both in our work, we also talk about the BQ. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. And talk about cutting edge. So most people got the IQ and the EQ, and BQ stands for body intelligence. And the simple idea, and most people get this very quickly, is that your body, literally your physical body and the sensations that are occurring on and in this body is actually your first line of awareness in the world. And the body takes in information and has an intelligence. Now I'm going to make a wild statement here that is actually far faster and far more reliable than your cognitive processing capabilities and even your heart-centered emotional capabilities. And everybody gets this. If you think about a time in your life when your body has given you what we might call instinctual information, most people can relate to this kind of in a moment of caution or fear. You're in a particular environment and the body starts to react like there's danger present. And without having any kind of cognitive awareness of what it is or emotional understanding of it, the body is saying, danger, look out, look out. And that's what we're talking about. Most everybody has had that experience. So there's a whole new field of leadership coming on board, which is teaching people to learn very practical ways to start to pay attention to the information the body is giving you. So now let's get practical. You're interviewing somebody to join your team, and they're going through a series of interviews with everybody on your team. In addition, you might be asking them a set of behaviorally descriptive interview questions, and you'd be doing all the normal stuff around checking their resume, and you might actually be giving them some thought models to play with, and then having a conversation with them. When we teach teams to create their interview scorecard, one of the things we ask them to just check is, during the interview, did you have any body sensations? Now, this could be racing heart, palpitations in the heart, a little perspiration, a little nausea in the tummy, kind of an odd headache. And all we ask is that you begin by just taking notes, learning. So you're learning the language of your body. So you just wrote down, well, yeah, I didn't notice I had a little bit of nausea. And I wasn't sick and I had a good meal, but I was a little bit nauseous. Now, what we would ask you to do over time if we were coaching you is we just ask you to start to take notes about that. What happens after a decision gets made around decisions where you had a little bit of, queasiness in your tummy? And what we discover is that queasiness in the stomach is information. Now, for example, queasiness in the stomach is often information to pay attention. It's the body saying, wake up, don't go to sleep. There's something happening here in this interview. And literally, it could have been in the question that just got asked that you should pay more attention to. So that might be as simple as you learn that when that happens, you don't move on. You stay on that particular subject and just drill down a little bit more. So it's a whole field that's coming on board, this BQ thing. But I think it's the next big discovery. Obviously you got to have enough IQ to get a seat at the table. EQ now, anybody who's fighting against EQ, and people still are, is just fighting now against the hard science. And BQ is the next emerging thing from my standpoint.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
I had read a study a couple of years ago that the body is hit with about 12 million pieces of information per second, and only about 4,000 of those 12 million actually make it to the brain, and many of those get processed by the amygdala, the reptilian brain. So when you think about how executives need to show up and be operating from their prefrontal cortex, if they're relying just on their IQ, there's such a small amount of information that they're making their decisions on it, as opposed to trusting their body intelligence.
That's fabulous. I like that. Yeah, I think the conversations you're having, that's the future of a whole different way to make decisions and to lead.
Well, I love how you're applying this information in this new form, or it's not a new form, but it's a new understanding of a form of intelligence in very practical and pragmatic ways with your clients.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we do, now we don't do this at the beginning, after we've worked with a team for a while, one of the things we do is we invite them to start to pay attention to what the bits in the body are doing. So we say, imagine that your body is a bag of little bits, like millions of little bits. We actually give them a handout where there's a body drawn. And then we ask them to tune in enough to know, what are the bits doing? Like where and what? So you might tune into your jaw and you might go, wow, the bits are like tightening. My jaw feels tight. Or you might tune into, the shoulders and you might notice, wow, the bits are popping or hot. And so we're wanting to give them a language to talk about the body. What is happening in the body? And because most of us, certainly I'll just speak for me, I grew up, as a competitive athlete, kind of a person who used the body, but hardly ever was informed by the body. I never had a football coach say to me, hey, if you tune into your body, what information is it giving you? In fact, generally speaking, I was trained to ignore the body, things like pain or tiredness, to rise above that so that I could compete and achieve. So were many, many people. And so we're having to come back and learn how to find the body and listen to the body and language the body. By the way, this is what Goldman introduced around EQ. We say that before you can become emotionally intelligent, you have to be emotionally literate, which simply means in any moment, can you describe your emotion? Are you sad, scared, angry, joyful, bored? Can you language it? Can you just describe it? Then you can start to work on emotional intelligence, what to do with the language. Well, I think BQ is going to come the same way. We're going to need a language for BQ that doesn't exist. Certainly it doesn't exist in the commercial space. And in fact, this, Tom, this conversation you and I are having is still over on the edge, even with our most committed clients. This is a new conversation, which I think is great, but it's a new conversation.
Well, it's a fun one to have. I find that when I engage folks in this conversation, there's certainly the initial reaction of that's too woo-woo, it's too touchy-feely, but once they actually start paying attention and noticing, there's a level of awareness and efficacy that impacts their leadership. It's quite a transformational journey for them.
We agree. And from our experience, it's actually not touchy-feely or woo-woo at all. I get that that's what they say. It's actually a word that we use for body sensations is that it's one of three things that is unarguable. It's incredibly concrete. It is, another way we would language it for people who are a little skeptical is we would say it's another data set. People who like analytics like data sets. It's another data set. In other words, if I say to you, scan your body and tell me a sensation, and you go, let's just stay, with the jaw, tension in my jaw, that is not woo-woo and touchy-feely, and it's not interpretable. It is hard data. It is. It's factual. So, and this is part of what we believe is important for people to come away from what is interpretable or what we call story and come more toward what is unarguable. And a primary data set that is unarguable is the body's experience. So I would flip it on its head. I would say it's the least woo-woo thing in the world. Now, you could make the case, okay, so now I get the data set of body information. Now, how do I interpret it? That's a different thing. But even there, that's no different than you show up with a spreadsheet of whatever you're doing data analytics on. There's just numbers on a page. Now, we're still going to do interpretation. We're going to move from facts to opinions. What does the data mean? That movement from data to opinion or story and then decision based on that is what leaders do all the time. Well, what we're pointing at now is we're going to invite you to do the exact same thing with an equally hard data set, the body. And we're going to ask you to interpret it, and we're going to help you learn how to interpret it and then make decisions based on it. So we argue it's the exact same thing you're doing. When people say all the time, we just want facts, we just want data, we just want analytics. First of all, we say that's fabulous, but no one has ever made a decision based on facts. Never. Facts are part of a conversation, but we make decisions based on an interpretation of the facts. So we want all the facts to be available so that we can have the most information possible to create the possibility of the most interpretations so we can have a good decision matrix. That's, by the way, how teams see reality clearly. And one of the data sets is the hard facts of body sensation. So you get me, I'm getting wound up because I think this is such an interesting thing. And I wouldn't have thought we'd spend a lot of time on this, but I love it because I think it is really cool stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's an essential part of being a conscious leader is having that self-awareness. It impacts how I show up as a leader. It impacts how people experience my presence. And there are in the framework I use that we've spent a lot of time talking about the physical body, but we've also got a psychological, emotional body that interacts with the physical body. We've got a spiritual body that influences and shapes how we show up as a leader. We've got an energetic body and we've got a social body. And part of what we've been talking about is touching on those other dimensions of what it means to be human and what it means to be an effective leader.
I'm just curious, Tom, how do you invite your clients to pay attention to, let's say, BQ? I want to learn. What tools are you using?
It's a combination of things. So I encourage them to do integrate some kind of contemplative practice into their life. And whether it's prayer or meditation or walking in the woods, whatever works for them, it doesn't matter. I don't have a bias or a particular point of view other than it's important to have a contemplative practice to take the time to just notice what's going on in their body and to take note of that and to pay attention to their thoughts, to pay attention to physical sensations. And it's hard for that to happen unless you're in some kind of contemplative state.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. I agree with you. I've been now a meditator for many years, and almost every day, the way I enter into my meditation after I sit and I take a couple of breaths to get present is I start at the top of my head. I learned this from Vipassana meditation. I start at the top of my head and just scan down through the entire body, noticing sensations at the top of my head, in the front of my face, my ears, my neck, the top of my shoulders, my chest, my belly, my back, my arms, my abdomen, my groin, my butt, my legs, my feet. And all I'm doing is scanning what's here now. And of course, this is what you're pointing at with a contemplative tradition of some sort. You're getting here now. Because you can't have body sensations in the past or in the future. You did and you will, but they're not here now. Body sensations are one of the greatest ways to get here now because they're occurring in this now moment. So I love what you're saying, developing some sort of contemplative practice, including going for a walk in the woods and saying, what's here now? Oh,
Yes.
like the sound of a bird. Ah, this tree, my foot hitting the path. Those are just all practices to get here now, which is what we define. We define conscious leadership is being here now in a non-triggered, non-reactive way, being here in presence. So I love what you're saying.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network, the world's first 24-hour on-demand business and leadership video and podcast network, bringing conscious leadership to a global audience.
I've also heard you and Diana talk about taking full accountability or responsibility for how you're showing up and all of your actions.
Yeah, we wrote this book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, and commitment number 1 is all about radical responsibility. The very practical term is it's the decision to end blame and criticism. So, we started by talking about trust. When we go into organizations and we measure trust, one of the correlates that we see is low trust, high blame and criticism. In cultures where there's a lot of blame and criticism, fault finding, gotcha, there tends to be a CYA, cover your ass, kind of low trust environment. So when we go in, we want to talk about, would you as a leader and as a team be willing to end blame and criticism, fault finding? By the way, that includes end blaming and criticizing yourself. And start, the opposite of blame and criticism, is to start taking responsibility. And we say that for any issue going on in any organization, there's enough responsibility that everybody could take their 100% without blaming themselves. So if we missed our quarterly earnings, Mark, we could all sit around and say, from a place of curiosity, not from blame, how did I show up, me personally, such that we missed our target? What did I do or not do? What did I say or not do? What did I believe or not believe? How did I react or not react? From a place of deep self-awareness and learning. So learning becomes more important than fault finding, which is the source of blame. So we say, and you know this, Tom, the cornerstone of practicing conscious leadership is ending blame and criticism and choosing curiosity and responsibility.
So when you go into an organization, how do you measure trust, the level of trust? Is it a quantitative survey? Is it a qualitative interviews and focus groups? What is your methodology?
Yes, both. So we have a survey that we've developed based on the 15 commitments. And we've discovered that, if people are doing pretty well around, for example, taking responsibility and not blaming and criticizing, tends to correlate to higher trust. And then, if people are, like our 5th commitment is ending gossip and speaking directly to each other, high gossip in an organization, low trust. Direct communication, high trust. Commitment number 7 for us is around choosing appreciation versus resentment. The more appreciation there is, like celebration, the more trust. So we have a survey that helps us identify how people are doing on the 15 commitments, and that tracks over quite powerfully to trust. Then we also do interviews. We do one where we just do a typical 360, and one of the questions we ask, let's say I'm doing a 360 on you with your team, one of the questions I would ask is, how trustworthy is Tom as a leader? And then we get feedback and we bring it back to you. And then one of the things we do in team building, so this is the 3rd thing, a measurement tool, 360 interview kind of thing, and then a team building practice. Again, this is not the first thing we do in team building. So they've already built some communication and trust, but we do a feedback exercise where everybody completes the sentence. Let's say I'm on the hot seat, I'm getting feedback. And we go around the room and everybody completes the sentence. In order for me to trust you even more, I would need you to blank. That's an incredible practice. And by the way, the way we phrase that sentence completion is really important. In order for me to trust you even more, in other words, I'm assuming there's some trust. And by the way, there always is some trust.
Yes.
Even in the most toxic relationships, there's some trust. In other words, for example, in the most business settings, I at least trust you not to show up and do bodily harm to me.
It's a low bar, but I get it.
I might not trust you to tell me the truth. I might not trust you to have my back. I might not trust you to reveal all relevant facts, but I trust you not to do bodily harm. Okay, good. So for me to trust you even more than that minimal amount, I would need you to do the following. Well, if you are part of a 6 or 8 or 10 person team and everybody gives you feedback like that, you're going to find something incredibly powerful for you to work on. So imagine a team where everybody's willing to give that kind of feedback. In our experience, that increases trust. Let's say that the feedback came to me. I would trust you even more, 5 people say, if you showed up on time for meetings. And then I say, great, thank you. I am committed to make that my growth edge for the next 30 days. So I'm going to keep score on how much I show up on time for meetings. And then at the end of 30 days, I want to do what we call a tiny pulse or a quick pulse. And I'm going to find out whether your trust of me went up based on whether or not I showed up on time for meetings.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you do the initial baseline measurement of trust, and then I was curious to see what your methodology was to do ongoing assessment. It sounds like you do what you call quick pulses every 30 days.
Yeah, it depends on what I'm working on. But the idea would be that everybody, if we're co-committed to learning and growing as leaders, and that's not always true. That's an assumption that we'd have to explore. But if we're co-committed to learning and we have a feedback session, I take responsibility for coming up with my learning and coming up with something I'm going to do in the short term, 30, 60, 90 days at the most, to change how I'm being experienced by the team. And that could be that I'm going to really focus on giving more appreciation. It could be that I'm going to focus on, supporting people on my team to discover what they're really good at and live in it. We have a whole list of things it could involve. I'm going to ask questions more than make statements. And we like to have people doing short, high change impact things that occur in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks at the most, where I say to the team members, what I'm going to work on is becoming more trustworthy by keeping my agreements around time. Great, super, let's see how you do. And then we just, in a real time situation, we just ask people to give real time feedback in, do you see me improving? And as a result, do you trust me more? That would be a very simple way. Now, annually, we might go back and do a 360, or we might do something like that. But in the short term, what are you doing to make yourself a more impactful leader? And how are we going to give you feedback on whether or not you're accomplishing what it is you're intending to accomplish?
So in what you just shared, you mentioned assumptions. And to what extent do you incorporate assumptions and work around assumptions and beliefs into helping leaders evolve and develop to be more effective?
Yeah, they're essential. So let's start with assumptions. The word we use is commitments. I want to talk about commitments first, then I'll come back over to beliefs, part of which is assumptions. What we say is all drama in relationships, including in our professional relationships in teams and organizations, occur because we have unaligned commitments or unclear and unkept agreements. That's a direct quote that we got from Gay Hendricks years ago. Commitments are, what is our intention? The commitments are between me and the universe. It's how I've decided to live in life. Like, I commit to reveal and not conceal. I commit to, go direct and not gossip. I commit to feel my feelings and to support you to feel your feelings. So I'm making a set of commitments in my life about how I want to live my life. For you and me to have a great partnership, let's say you and I were going to go into partnership, Tom. One of the things we'd want to do is make sure our commitments are aligned. For example, if you're committing to live a life of candor and I'm not, we're going to have constant drama. The content will change, but the reason we'll have constant drama is because you're committed to living a certain way that I'm not committed to living. So one of the things we explore with teams is what are their commitments and what are they willing to be co-committed to? Because that creates the context that's most conducive to having drama-free workplaces. So that's commitments. Now, on the area of beliefs, I mentioned earlier that, one of our great teachers has been Byron Katie and the work by Byron Katie. So one of the things we teach people to do is identify their beliefs and question them. Identify your belief and question it. Identify your belief and question it. By question it, we mean literally turn it around. Would you be willing to see, would you be open to the possibility that the opposite of your belief could be as true or true as your belief? Now, Tom, that is a radical way to live life.
Absolutely.
Because most people want to believe that their beliefs are true and real. And then they set up an entire construct for how to live life, which includes, by the way, in the workplace, I'll get along with people who believe what I believe. I'll be good teammates with people who believe what I believe. If people don't believe what I believe, my job is to change their beliefs. That's a formula for sub-optimization as a team. What we want to do with individuals and teams is go through a disciplined, rigorous process to help people and teams identify their beliefs, their assumptions, and then question them over and over again. Back to your point about Jack Welch. When teams can identify their assumptions and beliefs and question them, deconstruct them, see that the opposite could be as true or truer, then they actually have a greater possibility of seeing reality more clearly. Teams and individuals that auger down in being attached to the rightness of their belief limit the capacity to see reality clearly. So, this, I'm preaching the choir here with you. We want people to identify and question all of their assumptions and beliefs, and we want teams to get co-committed about how they're going to be living and being in the workplace. That creates high-performing work teams.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact eddingtonadvisory.com.
So I'd like to shift our conversation a little bit and just talk about the state of organizations. I mean, we see it all the time in the headlines, and I think anybody in business knows that business is driving the agenda of the world. It's no longer nation states or the UN or other kinds of entities. The world's faced with some pretty dramatic challenges right now. Where do you see conscious leadership fitting into all of that, and how are you feeling about where we're headed as a species and for businesses?
Well, let's just talk about sustainability. We could talk about it at many levels, but let's just talk about it for a minute in the particular of teams, cultures, organizations, and its relationship to conscious leadership. Unconscious leadership is just simply not sustainable. It's not sustainable at the individual level because what it leads to is burnout, energetic burnout, because I'm living on the chemical cocktails of adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. I'm living in a fairly constant, stressed out state. So just as an individual, when I'm living unconsciously, there's a chemical that is coursing through my body and living in my body constantly. That chemical is designed for short-term response in the fight, flight, freeze, amygdala response, which you referred to. That chemical is not designed to be living in our bodies constantly. When I'm living unconsciously or below the line or in a triggered state, I'm living off that chemical, literally in an addicted state that is not sustainable at an individual level. It leads to all kind of physiological breakdown. So just start at the individual level. Then if you move that to the team or the organization, if we're going to live and lead and work unconsciously in a triggered reactive state from a place of scarcity, all the things that are the cornerstone of unconscious living and leading, it's not sustainable. It leads to exhaustion in the team. It's not a creative environment. People will not stay on our team long term, no matter how much you incent them with fear, guilt, shame, external rewards, money, or intrinsic rewards. You've got to, in this day and age, be creating environments where people are motivated by sustainable things like creativity, like play, like purpose, like meaning. Those do not occur in unconscious organizations. So at an organizational level, they're not sustainable. And of course, at the level of the collective, if we keep running the world from unconscious organizations, it's not sustainable to the planet. Now, we all know that. I guess we don't all know that. There's still people who believe that it could work, but certainly you and I would hold the belief that it's not sustainable at the collective level. Now, my belief is that it's changing. You know, like you, I've been in this conversation around conscious leadership now for, in one form or another for 40 years. I'm 66 years old. I started this conversation years ago. If you would have tried to have a conversation, let's just say around contemplative practice as a cornerstone for being an impactful leader in the commercial space, well, you couldn't have had that conversation 40 years ago unless, the leaders were Jesuits or something, or, Franciscans or Buddhists, which there were a handful, but not many. Now, as you know, Tom, the conversation around contemplation, meditation, mindfulness is becoming mainstream. Yeah. It seems like every week there's an article in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or, Inc. or something like that around the efficacy of contemplation, mindfulness, and meditation. In fact, I think we're getting to the place where Eric Langsher, one of our good buddies, who, along with Nate Klemp, wrote the wonderful book called Life XT, runs an organization called Life XT. The book is called Start Here. Eric says this, and I love this. He says, we're coming fairly rapidly to a time when if you don't meditate, you're at, a dinner with friends, and you admit that you don't meditate, it's going to be the same as it is today if you admit that you drive drunk. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't drive intoxicated, but if you say that you drive drunk, people are going to go, you what? Whereas 50 years ago, people drove with, a blood alcohol level that would put you in jail now. But now if you do that, you're looked at as though you've got two heads. Eric says, and I think this is true, we're not very far away from, if you're at a dinner party and, let's say, Tom, you would do this, you would say, hey, I'd just like to hear what everybody's contemplation practice is. And somebody goes, well, I don't do that. Based on the hard science of the efficacy of mindfulness, meditation, and contemplation, people are going to say, you what? And I think organizations are moving in the same direction. So again, you're seeing this and we're seeing this. Cutting edge organizations that are becoming those people who are changing the commercial space, whether in technology or healthcare or manufacturing, it doesn't matter, banking. More and more, those organizations are beginning to have the conversation of consciousness, conscious cultures, conscious environments, conscious leadership. And I think it's because of what we're talking about here. They know that the old way of doing it just isn't sustainable, let alone everybody knows that to win, you have to innovate. And you cannot innovate from the amygdala. You can't. The amygdala is not designed to innovate. It's designed to survive. So organizations where we say, we need innovation, and then they create cultures that are still fear-based, they can never innovate. It's only in trust-based organizations where you can innovate. So you and I could go on and on and on, but that would be a short riff that I would say in answer to your question, what do I see happening out there?
Well, thank you for that, Jim. Really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank you for joining me on the show today. I'd just ask you a question. What's the one thing you'd love the audience to leave this conversation with?
Oh, it would probably be what you brought up. I would want everybody to double down on their contemplation, meditation, mindfulness practice. Establish a reliable home base that you can go back to of presence, whether it's 5 minutes in the morning with Headspace or 30 minutes with another app or doing some sort of Zen practice, a reliable space of presence so that all throughout the day, you can compare your current experience to what you experienced when you were in contemplation. So you know what home base is, and then you can develop a way to get back to that while staying engaged in leadership. I'd go there as the starting point.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And for our listeners who want to learn more about you and the work you're doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yes, sure. Go to our website, conscious.is, conscious.is. And we love it because it's filled with resources that you can use and take, and you can get a hold of me through the website and learn about what we bring to the world through the website. So conscious.is is a great place to go.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tom. I love the conversation you're supporting in the world. So great to hang out with you.
Well, thank you.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit impacteffectnetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.